They called it the Pan-European, a machine built for comfort, speed, and endurance. But behind the chrome shine of Honda's ST1300 lies a truth that many riders never talk about. This sport tourer was supposed to be perfect. Police departments bought them, long-distance riders trusted them. Honda promised power, reliability, and that rock-solid engineering they were famous for. But something went wrong. What started as a dream machine became a story that shook the motorcycle world. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the Honda ST1300, the bike that promised everything but delivered a truth nobody expected. Before we talk about that, if you're a motorcycle fan and you've not yet subscribed to this channel, you're missing out on a lot. So make sure you give us a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button, and turn on the notification bell. Let's continue. Let me take you back to the early 1990s, when Honda decided the world needed something different. The Japanese giant had already conquered the racing circuits and dominated the commuter market. But there was a gap, a space for riders who wanted to eat up miles without sacrificing performance. That's when the ST series was born. The original ST1300, introduced in 1990, was Honda's answer to the BMW touring bikes that had owned the long-distance market for years. It wasn't just another motorcycle. It was a statement. Back then, if you were a rider who remembered the freedom of the 70s and 80s, when bikes were simpler but roads felt endless, the ST1000 spoke to something deep. It had a V4 engine that purred like a contented cat, shaft drive that meant no chain maintenance, and enough fairings to keep the wind off your chest at highway speeds. Honda built it for riders who had been around the block, literally. Men who'd raised families, built careers, and now had the time and money to ride the way they'd always dreamed. The ST1300 earned respect quickly. Police departments picked it up. Long-distance riders swore by it. It became the bike you saw parked outside diners on cross-country routes, covered in dust and stories. For over a decade, it held that position. But Honda wasn't satisfied. By the early 2000s, they knew they could do better. Technology had advanced. Riders wanted more power, better handling, and modern features. The competition wasn't sleeping either. So Honda went back to the drawing board. What emerged in 2002 was the ST1300, bigger, faster, and more sophisticated than its predecessor. Honda promised it would be the ultimate sport touring machine, combining the comfort of a cruiser with the performance of a sport bike. Dealers couldn't keep them in stock. Riders lined up to trade in their old bikes. The motorcycle press sang its praises. Everyone thought Honda had hit another home run. And for a while, it seemed like they had. But as riders started putting serious miles on these machines, whispers began to circulate. Small concerns at first. Things that seemed like isolated incidents. Nobody imagined what was really brewing beneath that sleek bodywork. The Honda ST1300 rolled out with specifications that made seasoned riders sit up and take notice. That 1,261 cubic centimeter V4 engine wasn't just bigger than the ST1000's power plant. It was smoother, more refined, and pushed out around 125 horsepower. For a touring bike, that was serious muscle. You could cruise at 80 miles per hour all day long, and the engine would barely be working. Twist that throttle passing slower traffic, and you'd feel power that reminded you of the muscle bikes from decades past, except this was wrapped in a package designed for crossing continents. Honda's engineers paid attention to every detail. The linked braking system meant you could grab the rear brake pedal and get some front brake action too, advanced technology for that era. The shaft drive was maintenance-free compared to chain-driven bikes. The windscreen was adjustable, the seat was plush, and there was enough storage in those panniers to pack for a month-long journey. The instrument cluster gave you all the information you needed without overwhelming your eyes. This was a bike built by people who understood what real riders needed. But here's what really caught attention: the handling. Despite weighing over 600 pounds dry, the ST1300 could carve through mountain curves with surprising grace. That low center of gravity and sophisticated suspension meant you could lean into corners with confidence. Riders who'd spent their youth on lighter bikes from the 70s and 80s found themselves impressed. This wasn't some highway-only barge. You could actually have fun on twisty back roads. The bike felt planted, stable, and confidence-inspiring, or at least that's what everyone thought at first. The design itself was pure early 2000s Honda, aggressive yet refined, with sharp lines that suggested speed even when standing still. The headlights were modern, the fairings were substantial, and that red paint option looked particularly sharp. Sitting on one in a showroom, you felt ready to conquer any road in America. But here's where our story takes a darker turn. Within the first few years of the ST1300's production, riders started reporting issues that Honda hadn't advertised in those glossy brochures. First came the heat. And I'm not talking about normal engine warmth, I'm talking about scorching heat that made long rides in summer traffic feel like punishment. That V4 engine, packed tight under all that bodywork, would cook the rider's legs on hot days. Some riders reported temperatures so intense they had to pull over and let the bike cool down. For a touring motorcycle designed for all-day comfort, this was a serious flaw. Then there was the altitude problem. Take the ST1300 up into mountain passes above 8,000 feet, and that fuel injection system would stumble and hesitate. For riders planning cross-country trips, this wasn't just inconvenient, it was potentially dangerous. Imagine you're passing a truck on a mountain highway and your bike suddenly loses power. That's not the Honda reliability people had trusted for decades. Weight became another issue once riders got beyond the initial honeymoon period. Yes, the bike felt stable and planted in most conditions, but push it to the edge, say in a sudden emergency swerve or during low-speed maneuvering in a parking lot, and that 650-pound machine could become a handful. Drop it once, and you're looking at expensive bodywork repairs and a bruised ego. The suspension, while sophisticated, had its own quirks. Some riders found it too soft for aggressive riding, but too firm for true comfort on rough roads. You'd hit expansion joints on an interstate and feel every jolt through the seat. The linked braking system, revolutionary as it was, sometimes felt disconnected and vague compared to traditional setups. Experienced riders who were used to precise brake found themselves having to relearn their instincts. Remember, these were riders who'd grown up with simple bikes you could fix with basic tools. Now they were dealing with complex electronics that required dealer service. Now, if you're enjoying this story and you want to hear more about the motorcycles that shaped our riding culture, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. We've got plenty more stories to share, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Let's keep rolling. Honda marketed the ST1300 as the pan-European overseas, and in Europe, the bike found its natural home. The roads there, smooth, winding, with reasonable speed limits and frequent stops, suited the ST1300 perfectly. European riders embraced it. But America is different. Our highways stretch for hundreds of miles with nothing but sagebrush and sky. We ride in Death Valley heat and Rocky Mountain cold. We expect our bikes to handle everything from sea-level humidity to desert dryness to mountain altitude, often in the same week. American riders have always demanded more from their machines because our country demands more. We inherited that spirit from the riders of the 70s and 80s, men who would throw a bedroll on a bike and disappear for weeks, knowing their machine could handle whatever came. The ST1300 was sophisticated, maybe too sophisticated for the raw reality of American long-distance riding. Police departments initially loved the ST1300, seeing it as a natural replacement for aging ST1100 fleets. The extra power meant they could catch speeders more easily. The comfort meant officers could spend full shifts on the bike. Officers reported the same heat issues civilian riders experienced, which was particularly problematic when wearing full uniforms and gear. The weight made low-speed pursuit maneuvers challenging, and in stop-and-go traffic enforcement, that fuel injection stumble became more than annoying. It became a safety concern. Some departments stuck with the bike, making it work through careful maintenance and rider training. Others quietly began switching back to the ST1300 or looking at other manufacturers. The ST1300 had proven itself capable in many ways, but it hadn't delivered the bulletproof reliability that Honda's reputation had led everyone to expect. For riders who remembered when a Honda meant absolute dependability, this was disappointing. We'd seen Honda build bikes that would run forever with basic maintenance. Now we come to the part of the story that changed everything. What started as rider complaints about heat and handling took a devastating turn when serious accidents began occurring. Police departments, which had been among the ST1300's biggest advocates, started reporting crashes that raised troubling questions about the bike's handling characteristics in emergency situations. Some ST1300s would develop a dangerous oscillation if the rider made certain inputs or encountered particular road conditions. For a trained police rider or experienced touring veteran, this was terrifying. The bike that felt rock solid most of the time could suddenly feel like it was trying to shake itself apart. Several departments reported officers going down in accidents that seemed to involve this instability. In 2009, a tragic accident in Arizona involving a police officer on an ST1300 brought national attention to these concerns. The details were heartbreaking, and the aftermath led to intense scrutiny of the motorcycle's design. Some agencies made the difficult decision to ground their ST1300 fleets pending further investigation. Honda faced mounting pressure to address these concerns. The company issued technical service bulletins, offered suspension updates, and worked with various agencies to understand what was happening. But the damage to the ST1300's reputation was done. Word spreads fast in the riding community, especially among older riders who've seen friends hurt or killed over the years. The ST1300 had gone from being Honda's flagship tourer to a bike that carried questions and shadows. For a company built on safety and reliability, this was devastating. Despite everything, the heat, the handling concerns, the tragic accidents, a devoted group of riders stood by the ST1300. These weren't naive newcomers or blind brand loyalists. They were experienced riders who'd put tens of thousands of miles on their bikes and genuinely loved them. Talk to these riders, and they'll tell you a different story than the one making headlines. They'll tell you about crossing the country multiple times without a single mechanical issue. They'll describe the confidence they felt carving through Appalachian curves or cruising across the desert Southwest. These loyal riders learned their bikes intimately. They understood the weight distribution, the suspension characteristics, and the limits of the machine. They made modifications, aftermarket seats, auxiliary fans for cooling, suspension adjustments that addressed the known issues. They became experts on their ST1300S in a way that reminded you of old-school riders who could diagnose engine problems by sound alone. For these riders, the ST1300 wasn't a problem child. It was a misunderstood thoroughbred. They argued that the handling issues were specific to certain loading conditions and rider inputs, not inherent flaws. They pointed out that thousands of ST1300s had logged millions of miles without incident. They noted that every motorcycle has limitations and that proper training and awareness could mitigate the risks. Online forums and owner groups became havens for these devoted fans. They shared tips, technical advice, and riding stories. They organized group rides and rallies. They proved that in the right hands, with the right understanding, the ST1300 could still be an exceptional touring machine. Some of the most impressive long-distance riding records were set on ST1300s during this period. Iron butt riders pushed these bikes to extremes and came back praising them. This created a strange dichotomy, a bike that was both praised and feared, loved and questioned depending on who you talk to. If you're finding this story as compelling as we are in telling it, make sure you're subscribed to this channel. We dig deep into motorcycle history, the good, the bad, and the lessons learned. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss our next journey into the bikes and stories that matter. Honda discontinued the ST1300 in North America after 2012, though it continued in other markets for a few more years. The company moved on, developing new models and new technologies, but the ST1300's legacy remains complex and controversial. In many ways, it represents a turning point in motorcycle design philosophy, the moment when technology and sophistication began to outpace the simple reliability that riders had always valued. Are you getting a bargain on a capable touring bike that was misunderstood, or are you buying someone else's problem? The answer depends on your experience level, your willingness to learn the bike's characteristics, and your honest assessment of your own riding skills. This isn't a bike for everyone, and there's no shame in acknowledging that. The ST1300 taught the industry important lessons about weight management, heat dissipation, and handling dynamics in large touring bikes. Subsequent sport tourers from Honda and other manufacturers clearly incorporated these lessons. They paid more attention to rider comfort in hot weather. They designed suspension systems with more adjustability. They worked harder to manage weight and maintain stable handling across a wider range of conditions. In that sense, every rider benefits from what was learned through the ST1300's troubled history. For those of us who remember the simpler bikes of decades past, the ST1300 represents both progress and caution, but we also added complexity, potential points of failure, and characteristics that required more skill to manage. Think back to the motorcycles that defined American riding in the 70s and 80s. Simple machines, most of them. A Harley with its big V-twin that you could hear coming from a mile away. A Honda Gold Wing in its early days before it grew into the touring behemoth it became. The CB750s, the Kawasaki Z1s, the bikes that changed everything. The ST1300 came from a different era, one where computers controlled fuel injection and ABS managed your braking, where linked systems made decisions for you and electronic sensors monitored everything. This was progress, supposedly, and in many ways it was. Those old bikes required constant maintenance, temperamental tuning, and acceptance of limitations we don't tolerate anymore. But they rarely surprised you. Their problems were obvious and fixable. The ST1300's problems were subtle, emerging only under specific conditions, requiring sophisticated analysis to understand. There's something valuable about simplicity that we've lost in the pursuit of performance. The riders who grew up in those earlier decades understood their machines in a way that's harder now. You knew every component intimately because you'd had your hands on most of them. Modern bikes like the ST1300 don't invite that kind of relationship. The ST1300 represents a crossroads where motorcycling moved from the mechanical era into the electronic age. Some riders made that transition smoothly. Others felt left behind, mourning the loss of simplicity and directness. And some, tragically, paid a price when new technology didn't perform as promised. We can appreciate the progress while still acknowledging what was lost along the way. The future of motorcycling will be even more computerized, more sophisticated, more removed from the raw mechanical experience. The ST1300 was just an early chapter in that story. The Honda ST1300 was a bike that promised everything: power, comfort, and Honda reliability wrapped in modern technology. For some riders, it delivered. For others, it became a hard lesson about the dangers of complexity and the price of pushing boundaries too far. It could cruise forever on open highways, yet it carried shadows that many never saw coming until it was too late. Honda discontinued it in 2012, but its story remains a reminder that not every machine lives up to its promise, and sometimes the truth only comes out after thousands of miles and hard-learned lessons. If you enjoyed this deep dive into motorcycle history, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss our next ride into the stories that shape the machines we love.